when women decide to remain in the workforce, which many do because our country right now almost requires a dual income home, right? Most families can't afford to
So
live on
true.
a single income. Oftentimes we hear this narrative of men being like, oh, I'm just going to go take a shower. Not asking, but just telling.
In the United States, as a society, we feel that we must constantly be following around our children. Moms, I feel like, judge other moms for not following their children around. It's just a reality that a mother cannot show a man how to be a man.
One, I don't agree with you on the age thing. I think men are just as impactful from the second that baby comes home. I don't think men play a bigger role after a certain age with kids. I think men and women are incredibly impactful at all ages of their kids' lives. And I think
This episode is sponsored by Black Label Meat. Black Label Meat only sells premium quality meat that is grass-fed, grass-finished, and they do regenerative grazing practices. Check them out now, blacklabelmeatcompany.com, and use the code Jesse for 10% off. All right, Paige, I want to thank you for jumping on the podcast today. And
thank you.
we'll do a quick backstory on how we got connected. I made a video on daycare, and someone commented that they would like Paige to stitch the video because you do a lot of stitching of videos. If you want, maybe tell us a little bit about what you do, what your platform is about.
Sure. So I am a content creator mostly on Instagram and TikTok, but you'll find me other places as well. And the things that I talk about typically revolve around my experience of being a working mother, a millennial mother for context, if that helps. And I talk a lot about childcare and the childcare crisis that is plaguing so many families currently and its impact on the economy. I talk about the mental load of parenting and what that looks like and how to address it. And I talk about the inequities that tend to exist between men and women, specifically in the home, and how that bleeds into other areas of our life, like the workplace.
So I guess my first question is, if you had to tell men listening to this how they could either support their wives, or what is a step that they could do in what you would consider the right direction when it comes to the daycare sphere, what would you say?
Well, oftentimes childcare is something that falls to women, right?
Mhm.
When we think about marriage and children, we think about whether or not mom is going to stay at home, right? That's a primary question that
Mhm.
women get asked. Are you going to stay home with your kids? And people don't typically ask men that question. And I think when women decide to remain in the workforce, which many do because our country right now almost requires a dual income home, right? Most families can't afford to
So
live on a
true.
single income. Um, when a woman remains in the workforce, oftentimes the burden of finding and coordinating and paying for childcare falls on her, right? We'll even hear that conversation of, well, her entire salary goes to childcare, so it's not worth it for her to have a career. And I would really like for us to change that narrative, right? It's not about her and whether or not her salary covers the cost of childcare. It's whether or not the combined salaries and the economy of the home cover the cost of childcare, right? It's
Mhm.
not about his career versus her career. It's whether or not it makes sense for the entire family. And I think it's really important to not view childcare specifically in such a small lens as we do right now. We often think, oh, this is the next 3 to 5 years, right? And after that, she can go back to work and it's fine. But so often when women leave the workforce, they take a major financial hit, a major career hit. It's very difficult to get back into the workplace and to get back to an earning place that they were once at. And there's this misconception that childcare ends when a child hits public school age, and they don't. Right? There's after school care, before school care, summer camp, all of which can be incredibly expensive and difficult to coordinate. And so a lot of women find themselves actually leaving the workforce when their kids hit public school age more than when they're infants because it becomes much more difficult to manage at that point in time. And so I think in order to be a partner who's supportive, it's changing that narrative. It's being a part of the conversation and taking ownership of finding, coordinating, and paying for childcare.
So I gotta say, I completely agree about the two household income. And I often say, like, I would love to go back to the 40s, 50s, 60s, where you could live off a single income household and still be considered middle class, upper middle class off one income. But it's not how it is today. Today's technology with the purchasing power of those generations. Um, because it is unfortunate. I mean, it's very fortunate for, I guess, my household that we live in an upper middle class neighborhood off one income, and my wife can stay home. She makes beauty products now, and she has like a line, and that's what she likes to do. Um, of like skincare and lip balm and all natural products, etc. It's something that she's really into. Um, But the reality is, most households really need that dual income. And when you say that it's put on the mother to pay for childcare, it kind of makes me think of what you're saying of that needs to be a discussion between both spouses. But why do we look at it as it's on the mom when, like, I guess in my household, like, my income is my wife's income. Like, it is just across the board ours. There is no separation. And I don't think it's healthy when a couple looks at this is my money and that is her money. She buys her car, I buy my car, she pays for childcare, I pay for XYZ. So
Mhm.
I almost think we got to go back and like, what are those priorities? And what are your thoughts on that? What I just brought up there, of because it sounds like it's a split mindset.
I think it's a really tricky dynamic, right? I think we would love to believe that every couple who is married or not married, right, but sharing finances have that viewpoint, which is this is our money, right? We decide
Hmm.
together how we spend it, and we both have full access and control over this money. I can buy myself coffee without you asking me why I bought myself coffee, right? Like I have access to money and I'm able to spend it, knowing that we have a budget, right? And
Hmm.
I would also have visibility to what you're spending, right? Um, Unfortunately, that's just not the case in every household, right? A lot of women who, especially are stay at home parents, don't have access to the family bank account. They don't have access to the retirement funds or the stock investments. They don't have access to their own credit cards, right? They don't have access to their own money. And so, unfortunately, for a lot of women, there is not that financial security. And so, it's actually a really scary position to be in, right? And so, when I think about it, I think it should be our money in the idea of how we budget and how we allocate funds. But then I do think there's a layer where, you can have a spending power on your own, right? So maybe money comes into a joint account, you pay all bills, you each get X amount of a stipend, and Jesse does what he wants with it, and your wife does what she wants with hers, right? And that's your money to spend. But all the major purchases for the home are done together and prior to that money being allocated, right? And savings and whatever,
Hmm.
college funds for kids, all of those things. But that's just not how every home operates, right? And so I think that's why it's a difficult conversation for a lot of people to have, because a lot of people might say my money is your money, but when it comes down to how they logistically use that money, that's not how it operates.
Yeah, so that's, I guess, one of the things that I like about my podcast is one of the attributes I talk about is like, what does a masculine man look like these days? And I think we've lost that quality of actually being a provider. And if we are a provider, then our spouse should have unlimited access to all those resources that you were talking about. You shouldn't have to be questioning your wife on what she's spending the dollars in the joint bank account on. We shouldn't,
Mm,
we shouldn't be having these yours and mine, kind of like how you're saying, like, it would be nice if that's how culturally was today. I believe it was culturally like that maybe at some point, or other cultures maybe have that thing. But I do run across the number of couples who it is so separate.
mm.
And it's so, I guess, mind-boggling to me, of if you guys are in this together, if you guys are yoked, if she is your wife, then why is it separate? A quick story. I have like a friend who her and she's in her 50s, and her truck broke down, her Escalade or her SUV with a single
Sure.
child. With they have one child, and she was like, and my husband, and they had been married since they were in their early 20s, isn't the kind of husband who's like, I'll buy you a new car. It's you make your money from your salon, I make my money from my construction business, and they're well off. They're pretty well off, but it's so separate that it just kind of, it was so different from how I was raised. I
Mhm.
was raised that everything my dad had was my mom's.
Yeah.
So naturally, I've brought that into my relationship.
But I think you mentioned something which is like historically, you think at one point maybe that's how people viewed it. But I think, from a female perspective, historically, women didn't have bank accounts, right? We couldn't have a mortgage, we couldn't have a credit
Mhm.
card. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
your money was my money because I didn't have any legal right to my own money, right? Like, I think there's that there's that mindset too, like, right? Like, you have to think about that kind of generational um knowledge that we have as women that's been passed down to us. I think one of the number one things that's been told to me my whole life from other women is have your own money. Have your own financial freedom. Make sure you are safe. Make sure you have earning potential, right? My husband works a really dangerous job. And there's always that conversation of, okay, if something happened to my husband, yes, we have life insurance. Yes, he has additional life insurance. Yes, there's a pension and retirement, but I have 4 kids in
Hmm.
this economy. Like, I need to be able to support my children. I need to have a financial future for me and them. And that was always really ingrained in me. And I think, a lot of us have come from families where there's divorce, right? We've seen
Hmm.
mothers struggle on the other side of a divorce and money be withheld and men fight child support, right? And so there's that as well, right? It's this idea of, yes, when our money is our money, right? For context, my husband and I don't only have a joint bank account. We each have individual bank accounts and we share money and we share
Hmm.
savings and all this, and we share every finance in our house, right? Like, we basically earn the exact same amount of money, give or take. I might earn more now with social media, but like, we earn the same amount of income, and we use that money to fund our life, to pay for childcare, to pay for taekwondo and gymnastics, and going on vacation in the summers. Like, that is something we do together. But then at the end of the day, I have my own savings account. He has his own savings account. We have a joint savings account, right? But we do have a little bit of money that is just ours. And I don't know that there's anything wrong with that. I think the question is like, yeah, what's the healthy balance? And every couple has to probably decide that. But I think if there's a scenario where one person is withholding money from the greater good of the family, right? Like, oftentimes when you look at how people spend their money, you'll see that women spend, like, I think it's 90% of their income goes back into the home. And for men, it's a much smaller percentage. And obviously, this is not talking about a single income home, but like in a dual income home,
Hmm.
women's money goes directly back into the home and very little is kept for herself. Whereas men often do keep money for themselves, whether it's in their own investments, in their own bank accounts, spending on luxury items like a car, new golf clubs, whatever it might be, right? And so there is this difference too in how men and women spend money these days, which also might be a reason that people choose to keep that money separate.
And do you think that because I'm not saying you're wrong, but do you think that we'll call it data is there's a difference in income level,
I don't know if it
or do you think
matters.
that's something just across the board?
Yeah, I don't know that it matters.
Hmm.
Men still earn more than women. There is still this kind of motherhood penalty specifically. Like, women who are mothers earn less, not just than their male counterparts who are dads, but then their female counterparts without children, right? There's this assumption that if you have kids, you're not going to stick around, you're not going to work as hard, you're probably going to get pregnant again. And so we're not going to compensate you as well as other people, right?
Hmm.
And so when I think about money as it relates to the home, um, there were points in time where my husband was making much more money than I was, right? We've been together since we were 16. So like, he was a blue collar guy. He started his career at 18. I started mine at 24, right? So like, he had a very big head start on me. And we still tried to have an equitable relationship where, yeah, he might have been paying a little bit more of the bills at that point in time than I was, right? Um, But it wasn't that he had more power in the relationship because he earned more money. His time wasn't more valuable because he earned more money, right? If I go to work and make $50 an hour, this is all hypothetical, and he goes to work and makes $75 an hour, it doesn't mean that his time is more important than my time, right? We're both working 40 hours a week. We're both working hard. That money is still our money, right? And so I don't know that that should matter, right? As much. These are hard conversations to have. I think money is this really personal thing, and we all come to it with different experiences from our childhood as well, right? Were you raised wealthy? Were you raised lower class, middle class? Like, what was that experience like for you? And that's gonna influence the way you think about your money.
Yeah, okay. All the men who are listening, men or women listening to what she just said of, and I've said this on social media, a woman's value is far greater than the income she brings. So men need to get rid of their pride of, well, I make more. Because I've had guys in the comment section saying, well, what if I make more? And I'm just like, do you realize what you're saying? You're putting the value on on your wife, a dollar amount, and comparing it against yours for the value that she has in the home, which it's like I wouldn't care if my wife never brought in a single dollar into our household because her value far outweighs any dollar amount because of what she does as in taking this house and making it into a home, a loving, nurturing home. That's just how I look at it. And it irks me when guys want to compare value based off a dollar amount.
Well, and it's also, I think if you're in a dual income home, which most people are, um, like I said, there's that kind of motherhood penalty too, which is there's data that shows men are compensated higher when they become fathers because there's this idea that they're a provider. So we're going to pay
Hmm.
them more because they have a family. And when a woman becomes a mother, they pay her less because she's a mother. And so it's unfair because this happens to people in the same job, right? But even this idea that women often get paid less because they take maternity leave, right? And so whether or not we want that to work against them, it does. And men don't typically take that leave. Women tend to take the sick time for kids. And so there's all these stigmas when it comes to women and why they're compensated less than men are in these scenarios. And so also, I think putting that dollar amount on it negates all of those other things that are happening, right? Like you
Hmm.
remained in the workforce. Most men take off a week after they have a baby, right? And then they're back at work. So there's no penalty for taking time off to care for the kids. And so when a woman chooses to become a mother, she does so knowing that it's going to harm her financial earning capabilities. Like we understand that. We're not blind to that. And that's why it has to be a conversation with your partner about how you talk about these things. Because at the end of the day, I say this all the time. I don't want to marry a paycheck. I'm marrying a person. I'm marrying a partner. I'm marrying a dad. I'm not marrying his paycheck because also your paycheck can disappear tomorrow. Like that can't be the only thing you bring to the table in this relationship, and it shouldn't be the thing you hang your hat on. It's not the most important thing about you.
So I gotta ask you, if a younger girl was coming to ask you for advice on, I'm married, I have an opportunity to be a stay-at-home mom. I'm however many weeks pregnant, so there's still
Hmm.
8 months to go before I have
Sure.
baby number one. What would you advise her? Or
I would
what
have
would you hold on, I wanna first, what would
yes.
you give
Okay.
the advice to the husband about this situation in supporting his wife? And then you were to turn around into the next room and give her your advice.
Well, I
So
think there's
both
two
sides of the
parts.
coin. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's two parts to the conversation, right? There's the financial conversation, and then there's the equity in the home conversation, right? And the way we talk about those two things. So let's do finances first. I would tell them both the same thing. I think there should be a postnup. I think you should have an agreement that talks about how you're going to handle finances. Is she going to have a salary or her own separate bank account? Is she going to have a Roth IRA that's in her name? Is she going to be on every investment account? Is she going to be legally tied 50-50 to every asset in your family that you have? How are we going to handle those things? How are we going to protect her financially? Because if she's out of the workforce for the next 10, 15 years, and then something does happen, Now it's going to be incredibly difficult for her to get back into the workforce to make money, and she won't have any money to her name, which not only will impact her, but it will impact your children. Like it will
Hmm.
ultimately. And so I think it's in the best interest of both the man and the woman to have these conversations and to say, okay, well, this is how we're handling this. And again, I think to what you said, it shouldn't be tied to, well, this is my money and I'm going to allocate this much to her. Right.
Hmm.
I think it should again be a conversation of after bills and everything are paid, we share this money 50-50. You're able to work full time and have all these beautiful children in this house because I stay home full time.
Hmm.
Without me, you don't have this. Right. And so like
True.
it should be shared equally is my viewpoint on the finances part. Um on the home, on the mental labor and mental load and domestic labor conversation. Um my best piece of advice to them is again to view each of their time as valuable, as equally important. And to find equity for you all. And that's going to be different for everyone, right? If your husband, like my husband's a blue collar guy, he might have a week where he's gone. I just don't even see him, right? Like he's gone. On those weeks, I'm not going to be complaining he didn't take out the trash, right? Like he's been at work for 18-hour days. I'm not seeing him. That's
Hmm.
what's happening. If he's coming home after a 40-hour week and he's not taking out the trash, he's not taking care of the kids, and he's not emptying the dishwasher, but I'm doing all of those things by myself, I think that's a problem, right? So I think we have to talk about how we share the labor in the home, regardless of whether or not you work, right? Because so often, even when women work full time, even when they're the breadwinner, even when um, they're the sole earner in the home, they still tend to do more domestic labor and childcare than their male counterparts. And so I think there needs to be a conversation about what that looks like, right?
Hmm.
What does it look like when he comes home? What are the expectations? Is he going to go hang out on the couch and watch sports, or is he going to dive in and do tubby time? Is he going to help us make dinner? Is he going to, get the kids to bed, or is he going to do his own thing, right? I think we all have that picture of the dad who used to come home from work and just like go right to the couch with a beer. Like, is that what we're looking at? Or are you going to be an active participant in this house with me? And viewing each of their days as a work day, right? Like he leaves for work at 8 a.m. That's when she clocks in. He gets home at 5 p.m. That's when she clocks out of her job. And now we're a team. The
Yeah,
same
yeah,
way
yeah.
it would be if she went into the workforce, right? And so that would be my advice is to kind of have those conversations well before you have children. Not when you have them, because it's way harder. Like do it before if you can.
Yeah, those conversations need to be had and not in the moment. Totally agree. I think it was a guy named Ryan Pineda on social media. He made a video calling men who come home and kick their feet up soft.
Mm,
Yeah. And I thought it was great
yeah.
because it's like you were saying, come home, kick their feet up, 30 pounds overweight, crack open a beer, putting on football. It's yeah, it's that father, it's that thing that I talk about is the father who is in the household but isn't present.
Yeah. I mean, one of the ways I think about it is why do you want to be a dad?
Hmm.
Why do you want to have a wife? Why have children if you're not involved in their life, right? Why have kids if you don't know what their favorite snack is? Why have a child if you don't know what their best friend's name is, right? Like why don't you want to for a dad who doesn't want to participate like in that way, right? Who's like I work all day, it's not my job to know about their snacks, it's not my job to know about their best friend, right? My question to that often is like why wouldn't you want to know that, right? These are your
Hmm.
kids. I want to know who my kid's best friend is. I want to know when they're having trouble with their best friend and they're not best friends anymore, right? Like I want to know those things because I want to be there for my kid and I want to have a great relationship with that child. And I think it's so important. That's a lot of what I talk about, like inviting men into the conversation to be active parents in particular, like when we're talking about children, is so that they can be a part of the joys of being a parent. It's not just about changing the diapers, but when you change diapers, you sing a fun song. And now that kid always sings that song when you walk into a room and you change their diaper, right? Like that's really special. Why wouldn't you want to have that?
No, I mean, I agree. So far, there's nothing really that you've talked about that I would say that I disagree with. Um, yeah, the whole father coming home, putting his feet up. There was another thing that you mentioned, kind of in that same scenario that I wanted to touch on, but I was trying not to interrupt.
Oh, that's okay.
I'm sure it'll come back to me.
You lost it. Sorry.
No, no, it's fine. I mean, I think this is all good stuff, and people need to be having more conversations about this because I see too many. kind of, I'm not going to say broken homes, but it's like they're definitely are getting a bunch of cracks in the relationship because they haven't talked about these things. Oh, it came
You
to me.
got it. You got it.
The largest rise in divorce rates right now is because dual income household, but the wife is still expected to do all the domestic duties. So what you were saying, it's the
Yeah.
fastest rise in divorce, or the fastest, however you put that.
Reason or yeah, the
Yeah.
cause.
Of
Yeah.
in the last 3 years, it's like the number one cause. People will say, no, more people are getting divorced because of this. It's like, well, this one has hit the hockey stick where it used
Mhm.
to not be a reason, and now it's the fastest rising reason is that. And I've even made a video about that on social media, that if you aren't willing to split them, and then that's where guys were like, well, what if I make more? And it's like, dude, it's kind of bringing it back to what we were talking about earlier. You're putting your ego ahead of the relationship with your wife and the mother of your children, and still expecting her to do this. And yeah, it's kind of frustrating because as men, we're not holding ourselves accountable for the actions or the stress that is happening in the household. Because I like to say that men, we are the cause of all of our wives' problems, but we also have the ability to be the solution. And it's the
Mm.
thing that we don't want to take the accountability for of, hey, I could take a lot of the load off the stress of my wife by helping if we have the dual income, or
Mhm.
providing her with the resources to buy a house cleaner, pay a house cleaner. Like, there's so many things that we can do to take this load off. Let's say the guy doesn't want to help clean. Okay, so did you buy a maid? Is she coming once a week? Is she coming twice a week? Like, but are you providing her the resources and she has the option to do that? Like, there's a handful of
Yeah.
things that I put in that video that are we providing our wives with the resources.
Well, it's not our wives with the resources, it's our home, right? Like,
Exactly, it's the home.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah. It's yes, I understand what you're saying. I think the
Yeah.
other part of that conversation is oftentimes we'll say, "Hey, well, here's the money for a house cleaner," but it's your job to coordinate it, and it's your job to buy all the supplies, and it's your job to schedule her, and right, like it doesn't really relieve work. It might relieve the actual physical work, but it just creates a different layer to manage. But when I think about that piece where it's like, well, I make a lot of money, I work outside the home, I work hard, right? I don't want to have to come home and do laundry. I think of this, there a study just came out this week that said husbands cause women more stress than their children. Like according to like 70% of women in this study. And it's because of this, I think this mindset, right? Like that I don't have to do my own laundry and I don't have to put the dish in the sink. Like that's what she's there for. I get paid really well. But it's like having that coworker who does the same job at you as you, gets paid better than you, but is way worse at it.
But
You
they
know, like
suck.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, like, or even your
Mhm.
manager. Like, think about when you have that manager and you're like, this person is making 100K more than me. They literally do nothing. They don't understand what we're talking about. And I do everything, right? They delegate it all to me. I do all of the work. And then they go, well, I'm the manager. I make all the money. You do what I say, right? Like, you cater to me in this environment. We've all been in that position. We've all had that awful manager who makes so much more money than us, and we're like, "Oh, this is awful." Uh, it's the same thing, right? It can feel the same to be like, okay, well, my husband's this awful manager who's making all this money, who expects me to do everything and to not question anything because I don't make the same amount of money, and therefore I'm not as valuable, and I don't work as hard, or whatever that idea is. Like, I try to like think about it in other contexts outside of our home. Like, put yourself in a position where you felt that way before. It doesn't feel good. Nobody wants to be in that position.
No, I agree. Yeah. Let's. Do you want to talk about? I want to talk about kids,
Sure.
because and going to the beach.
Oh God. Yeah, sure.
I saw I saw a video on um, that you had posted. I don't fully know the context, but it was mom and dad
Sure.
going to the beach. Dad's taking a Kindle because he's going to read in a lawn chair.
Hmm.
So, will you explain the video? And then when you're done explaining, I want to go into, I guess, how I look at a problem culturally.
Sure. Yeah, so the video is this idea that a couple who have a child, like a 2-year-old, we'll say, I think a little less than two, heads to the beach, right? And if this is like their first time at the beach as a family. And on the way there, dad's packing his beach chair and his Kindle and not packing stuff for the kids, but packing stuff for himself. And his wife goes, "Why are you packing a Kindle?" And he's like, "Well, I'm going to read at the beach." And she says, "Well, who's going to watch our kid?" Like, you're assuming that I'm just gonna watch her the whole time,
Mm.
right? Or like, are we switching off? Like, what does this look like, right? And he's like, "Oh, I thought we were just gonna like relax." And I think any parent who's been to the beach with a less than 2-year-old knows there's no relaxing at the beach with a 2-year-old. Like, they don't stop moving, they don't stop eating sand, throwing sand, wanting to look at seashells, whatever it might be, right? I have a 2-year-old, and I just went to the beach for a week. We were exhausted, like so exhausted. We were in bed at like 8 o'clock every night, so tired. And it's this idea that so often, even in a dual income home, even when a dad is physically present often, mom is the default. The expectation is that mom has eyes. Mom's watching the kid. Mom's packing the kid stuff. Mom brought the sunscreen. Mom brought the water bottle. Mom brought the beach toys. Mom is on. And so if dad happens to fall asleep while sitting in the beach chair, that's okay because mom's on it, right? And the expectation is she's the default parent. So she will always be doing it. She will be there. And if she wants his help, she has to ask for it. And I think the frustration from a lot of women in particular who find themselves in this position is that there is no they never get to be, the parent who gets to close their eyes at the beach without explicitly saying, "I'm going to sit down for 5 minutes," or "I'm going to go pee. Can you please watch the baby? Can you make sure to watch the baby?" Or "I'm going to, in the home, I'm going to go shower. Can you please watch the baby?" Right? Oftentimes we hear this narrative of men being like, "Oh, I'm just going to go take a shower," not asking, but just telling, right? Women feel as though they have to ask for that support. And so that's kind of the gist of the video, or
Mhm.
the overall concept of the default parent, and where that came from. But I think the default parent happens despite the best intentions. Like, I don't think it's intentionally. I say this all the time. I don't think it's individual issues or intentionally harmful. Right. I think we've all been kind of fall into these patterns sometimes, right? When we think about a mom, she gives birth to a baby, she takes maternity leave, maybe she's breastfeeding, she takes on all this work up front. And so now she's kind of become the default, right? The baby's
Yeah,
a little
yeah.
bit closer to her. And so I think when I talk about these things, I'm not saying that dad had ill intent, but there's this societal expectation and these gender norms that kind of come into play when we talk about the default parent.
So I think everything you said is definitely what happens societally in the US.
Sure.
But the problem that I have with this video is that in the United States, as a society, we feel that we must constantly be following around our children. So, like, there's this book called Raising Bebe. I don't know if
The
have you
French
heard?
book. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
she was the American writer. She went to France, was got pregnant, was watching all these people how they raise their babies,
Mhm.
and they have this term called le laissez faire when it comes to them going to a park and all the moms sit far away and they just have social time and they allow their children to go off and do their completely own thing.
Mhm.
And culturally in America, moms, I feel like, judge other moms for not following their children around. Versus if you're the mother who goes about it with the French approach of, yeah, I have a 2-year old and he's at the park and we're sitting at the bench and we're 50, 70 yards away. He is fine. But all the other parents at that same park and or beach, because we go to the beach once a week, so I totally get it. It's like I know my wife was always feeling judged by the other moms by
Mhm.
not following around her 2-year old. Now our youngest is 3, but and I would constantly be like, we can't care about their opinions. Like, our child needs to have his independence. He'll turn around and look at us when he's ready. It's that like tethering. The 2-year-old will go off, turn around. Can I see mom and dad? Play, look up, maybe even come back for some hugs, some kisses,
Yeah.
turn around, go back and play. And culturally, we want to make sure that we're hand holding our young children and not letting them explore. And I get that we see crazy stuff out in the world that happens, that a child can get snatched, but the reality is those are anomalies.
Yeah. I mean, I agree and I disagree. I think it's actually way more layered than that. I don't think it's just women judging other women. I think women are held to pretty high standards here in our country, but we
Mhm.
are also held to unrealistic expectations, right? If I bring my 2-year-old to a restaurant and it's not a he, it's a she, she yells, um, I'm going to be judged not just by other women, but by generations
Everybody,
above me. Right.
everybody, yeah,
Every single person saying
totally agree.
that child doesn't know how to behave in public. And it's like, well, how are they going to learn unless they come in public, right? But they're two, like that they're just going to yell, like that's what 2-year-olds do. Um, and
I would
this idea that
encourage your kid at the restaurant. If I heard your kid yell, I'd be like,
to yell a little
"Yeah."
louder, yeah.
I would.
Well, but that's the thing, right? Like when I go to a restaurant, I have 4 kids. We're not a
Mhm,
quiet family. We're a loud
mhm,
family. We're a very loud family, and my kids are 7 and under, right? We don't even
mhm.
have any kid who would be like considered a big kid yet, right? So,
Yeah.
um, when we go out to eat, like I get that you don't want to sit next to us. I get that. Like, if I were out on a date, like, do I want to sit next to the family with 4 kids? For sure, I don't. But I have friends who have family in other countries, and they're like, it is so refreshing to come here because nobody gives you a second look at a restaurant when your toddler's crying. Nobody cares that your toddler's dropped the fork on the floor 15 times, right? Like, nobody cares. And kids are welcome everywhere, right?
Wait,
And
in
there's
the
this
foreign
narrative.
countries or in the US?
No, foreign countries,
Okay, that's
foreign
what I
countries.
thought.
Like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Totally agree.
when they go visit their families abroad, right? So, my friend's husband is not from the U.S., and so like when they go to his country, she's like, it's such a different experience, right? And
Yeah.
um, in our country, we really do believe that kids should be kind of kept out, right? Like, unless they can behave appropriately, they should be kept out. But then how do they learn to behave appropriately? So there's
Mhm,
that layer. I think there's that layer. I think there's a second layer to that, which is like my thing at the beach is like my 2-year-old's gonna run in that water and she doesn't know how to swim, right? Like, so like what are we doing? Are we watching her? Right. I think there's that
mhm,
context. I'm a pretty low key parent. Like my friends will tell you, like I'm pretty chill. I'm kind of like, yeah, live your life. You're gonna fall. You're probably gonna get hurt sometimes. This is life. But I still think that there are a lot of unrealistic expectations, right? Like the bar for women is very high in regards to what we expect, right? When I'm at my son, I made a video on this. When I'm at taekwondo practice for my son at 4 o'clock, I'm still working. So I might be on my phone, I might be doing something, and I get judged really harshly for that. Like that mom doesn't care about her kids, she's not paying attention, whatever it might be. And when a dad does it, it's kind of like assumed, like, oh, he's probably working, right? But there's like this weird assumption that I'm just over here scrolling my phone. And see all these videos. Oh, this mom was just at the playground on her phone while her kid was playing. Like, what a neglectful mother, right? And so I do think that, yeah, there's this really large amount of pressure on women in particular to show up in this way. And I put a lot of content online, and I will tell you that the pressure doesn't just come from women. There are plenty of men who tell me in my comments, well, how are you a good mom if you're posting these videos? You can't be a good mom if you're always on TikTok. You can't, and mind you, this is a job. Like I make money doing this.
yeah.
And so it's not that I'm just like, also my kids aren't this, yeah, like my kids aren't sitting next to me. I don't TikTok when my kids are home. I don't put
Mhm,
videos on Instagram when my kids are home. You'd know that if you follow me. Like you've never seen my children and you won't see my kids. You don't hear them because they're not there.
yeah.
And so, I think it comes from both, right? I really do think it comes from both, and it comes from this expectation that women should be this primary caregiver. They're better at it, and so they should throw themselves fully into it. And I think it is really difficult. I think it's really difficult to live in this society that kind of views you in this lens and puts this much pressure on you.
Yeah, I do believe it does come from both, and like you said, multi-generational. When
For
older
sure.
generations are out, it's like, how is your kid not in line? I guess I use
Hmm.
the moms thing because my mom, I mean, not my mom, my wife, she meets up often with other stay at home
Yeah.
moms or homeschool group moms. And when I go, I'm usually the only dad, because I
Hmm.
work from home. So sometimes I'll go up and I'll take the kids. Like she gets her own time. Like we schedule
Yeah.
times where I have the boys, so she gets X amount of hours every week of just whatever she
Her
wants to
time.
do, her
Yeah.
time, quiet time. And my wife, the way she was raised in, I guess, a very, I don't know, like individualistic household where she had three siblings, but she would joke that they were all related, but yet they were acquaintances because they would just
Oh.
stay in their rooms. They weren't super
Mm.
close. So her time is very important to her. It's just something she's always had throughout her life. So we'll do that and I'll go. And yeah, there's sometimes another dad and I'm just, they're like, your son's on the top of the jungle gym, like on the roof. And I'm sitting over there just trying not to be on my phone or just sitting back watching. I'm like, dude, I don't care.
Mm.
I get that you are speaking for your 3 year old, telling your 3 year old how to verbally interact with my 3 year old. I get that you guys are trying to squeeze up the stairs and down the slide with your kid, but that's just not me. I'm not going to do that. And I'm the kind of person who I'm sure you have this similar quality because we are putting ourselves out there on social media that I don't give a fuck what these people think. Like, I just
Mm-hmm.
don't. But I truly believe that I am doing the best for my children. I'm not the kind of person who's like, I don't care what happens to my kids. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't care that they are judging me when there's a handful of other parents trying to crawl through this jungle gym with their kids. And I'm on the sideline just letting my kids do what they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's this. We've definitely gone in a specific direction. My sister and I were talking about this. That actually playgrounds were built so kids could learn independent play, right? So they could learn how
Totally.
to do these things, right? And she's an early childhood educator. Like she's like, yeah, like there have to be opportunities for kids to learn. And so when she's at the playground, especially with her older kids, she says, "Hey, no, we're here for you to play. This isn't for mom, right? Like mom knows how to play on a playground. You
Yeah.
can go learn." But I do think there's this other layer of like I think a lot of women have also seen men who just are put their kids in harm's way in a sense, right? Like I think there's this big fear too for some women, right? Like I don't know if you've seen it, but I've had a lot of videos about grape cutting and this whole idea where men are like, I don't think it matters, and
Wait. What's
like
grape cutting?
cutting grapes, like when you feed your kid a grape when they're under a certain age.
Oh, I have not
Okay,
seen any of this.
okay, so when you go to a pediatrician, they're going to tell you, especially as your kid starts to eat solids, what the top choking hazards are, right? So if you're a parent who's gone to a pediatrician, they're going to tell you, like, if your kid's under 2, like, they really shouldn't be with pops, lollipops. Popcorn is like one of the number one choking hazards, and it gets like
Okay.
a lot of kids like aspirate on popcorn, and it ends up in their lungs, and it ends up being very dangerous. And then
Mm,
grapes, and not because kids don't know how to chew grapes, it's because similar to a hot dog, they're like the perfect shape for their esophagus. So or maybe it's not their esophagus. I don't know. I'm not a doctor, but it's like the perfect shape to get lodged
okay.
and block
Yeah.
their
Okay. That
breathing
makes sense.
capabilities. And so every mom I know cuts grapes. We all cut the grapes. We have these grape cutters. You pop your grape in, you just go like this and you pop them out, and the grapes are cut, right? And
Okay.
I think I made a video when I was cutting grapes, and a dad was like, I just don't think that matters. And I'm like, well, the data shows it's like one of the number one choking hazards. So the question is, like, there's certain areas where I'm willing to let my kid experience risk, right? You want to try
Hmm.
and walk up those stairs by yourself? Okay, let's try it. Like, let's see what
Yeah.
happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
And mom's going to be behind you, maybe, and I'm going to catch you. But a grape, like choking happens to adults, right? It's not a matter of trust or risk. It's a matter of fact that it's the top choking hazard, and X amount of children die a year from grapes, for example, right? And there's a lot of conversation around this because in the context of like the default parent, right? Oftentimes that default parent is the person at the doctor's office, is the person at the dentist, is the person researching baby led weaning, for example, whatever it might be,
Baby
right? And so
led
they have this
weaning.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, they have this inherent knowledge of what is
Mhm.
appropriate for a child of that age or whatever it might be. And their partner maybe hasn't done that work. And so it's like they come in with their opinionated parenting where it's like, they're fine. Who cares about the grapes? And this other person saying, like, hey, I've done actually a lot of work here. Like, I've researched this, I've talked to the doctor about it. Like, I'm going to cut the grapes until they're 4. Okay. And it takes like 5 seconds. So we're just going to cut the grapes. Right. And so I think there's also that level of like, again, pressure and expectation, one, which is if a kid gets hurt on mom's watch, she's a bad mom. If a kid gets hurt on dad's watch, it's like, oh, they were just having fun. Like, I'm sure it was an accident, whatever it might be. Right. So there's also those different expectations around safety as well. And so I think all of this is so like, to your example of like your son on the roof of the play gym, right? Like, there's a different level of tolerance, but also a different level of expectations for what we view. If your son were to fall and hurt their arm and they go to the
Hmm.
hospital, would
Hmm.
mom be treated differently than dad? And that is something that they are probably considering in that scenario when they see that child on the top of a plate structure, right? And it's not to say that either person is right or wrong, but we're all living our own unique experiences within this culture and society.
So what is your I really like where like a lot of the stuff that we're touching on. Man, there's so many things. What is your thought process when are you're familiar with Jordan Peterson?
Vaguely. I don't
So
consume much of him.
okay, so well, Jordan Peterson, formerly he was a child psychologist, and he would talk about how children need to be allowed to do dangerous things while
Safely.
focusing or
Oh, because
safely.
isn't there like the date? Yeah, there's like the dangerous things safely. Yeah, but okay.
Yeah, or
Yeah.
we in my household we never tell them to be careful. We always tell them to focus. I
Hmm.
just think there's too much negative connotation around being careful because it can apply to doing so many things in life. If we're too careful about the outcome, then
Hmm.
we're just going to prevent them from doing further things. So just we just change the verbiage to make sure you are focused
Yeah.
every time you're doing XYZ. But
Yeah.
he does talk about, the benefits, the cognitive development for children who are doing quote unquote dangerous things for their age level or as children, but making sure that they are doing it focused, like that they are paying attention and aware. They're not doing it recklessly.
Hmm.
And everybody's going to have that's going to be subjective to everybody what their own comfort level is. But with that being said, there is an aspect, and I don't care about the grape guy. I'm not going to defend that kid. That it is beneficial for dads to push their children to do those dangerous things a little bit more because they're going to have a larger net naturally than a mom when it comes to allowing some of those things. And I think it's terrible that culturally, again, my son falls off the top. They have a different reaction if I take him to the hospital because it was under my watch versus my wife. That stuff that's baloney.
Well, it's like, I was away. I was in DC this week, and my husband did drop off 2 days in a row, right? And so, like, my daughter went to school in shoes she's not allowed to wear to school, and but there's this like level of tolerance, like, oh, he doesn't know, and it's like,
Hmm.
he's their dad, and like, I came home and I was like, she's not allowed to wear jellies to school. Like, what do you do? Like, she has to wear
Hmm.
sneakers. Like, she's been at this school for a year. She's never been allowed to wear jellies. And he's like, "Oh, I asked her." I'm like, "She's 2. Of course she told you yes." Like, what do you think? I'm like, "Come on, she's 2."
uh,
Um, right, but there's a different expectation. If I were to bring her in jellies, they would say, "Hey, she's not allowed to have jellies on. Can you go home and get her different shoes?" That would be
hmm.
what they would say to me, right? And so there's this different we're living different lives in this parenting journey, unfortunately, and I don't think that is healthy. And I actually don't know that, this idea that dads should have this greater tolerance for risk. I know a lot of women who do. It's just that again, those expectations are different, right? And so we're
Hmm.
not just thinking about our feelings about this risk, we're thinking about the repercussions, right? If we allow our child to experience this risk, and what that looks like. Um, and we're inundated, I think, with information. There's information overload for moms in particular. I know before this call, we were talking about Instagram feeds. And, I'm getting inundated with safe sleep, safe food, safe this, safe that, appropriate tantrum protocol, how to potty train, right? Like, these are things that are like being thrown in
Yeah.
my face from the second I have a baby. And it's like, formula feed, don't formula feed, co sleep, don't co sleep. And it's like, oftentimes men aren't getting these kinds of messages, even in even in a mom's group, right? Like everybody's sharing this information and you're getting so much, and it can be hard to decide like, okay, what do I feel comfortable with though? Like, what do I want to do? Because
Yeah.
like, this is what I thought I wanted to do. And now my Instagram feed's telling me I'm a bad mom. And now I'm nervous. Like, have I
So
harmed my
true.
child? And I don't think men get that as much as women do, right? So like if our level for our risk tolerance is different, it's also because we've been like, it's been hammered into us that it is ultimately our job to keep this child safe, to make sure they grow up happy and healthy and thriving. It is up to us. And there's also this narrative too, like when somebody doesn't grow up to be a great person, they go, well, their mother, right? Like it's always like, oh, their mother should have raised them better. Their mother
See,
should
I
have taught
blame the
them
father.
manners. I think you're unique in that. I think it's even like on my videos, like if it's about a dad who like didn't show up in the right way, people will be like, well, you should blame his mom. And I'm like, what about his dad?
No,
Like, what
no.
about his dad? Why just mom? Why is mom the scapegoat for all of this?
I mean, when you even just look at statistically the amount of men who end up in prison, the amount of men who are obese, like it's a lack of a father in the household. Like all the bad data shows a lack of a husband, a father. There's no one, you still got Beethoven who was raised by a single mom.
Yeah.
It's like, so again, it's men not being accountable for their lack of actions in raising their children and why they're growing up. Like I never thought in a million years that I would love a person as much as I love my wife. Okay. And so I don't want anyone to think that I'm speaking down on women, but you cannot expect a woman to raise boys to become men. But like you were saying, people want to put it on the mom, but the dads need to be present. Like the reason your son grew up to be a fucking shithead is because your lack of input in his life. Free and clear. If you have an insecure daughter as a teenager and is a people pleaser and is trying to sleep with all the popular boys because she doesn't want to tell them no, that father was not present in his daughter's during his daughter's life. He was not giving her the right guidance. Maybe even the way he was treating his own wife. So she learns on how to be respected. Like men, I do not think are actually stepping up and playing the role that they should be playing. Like they're just not doing it, which is kind of why I
Mm.
started this podcast.
Yeah, and I think you and I slightly disagree on that one, where I think men and women play a very important role in their kids' lives. I think women can raise amazing men. I think men can raise amazing daughters. I think a combination can raise both, right? I think um, we all can provide for our kids in different ways, right? And I don't think my husband is necessarily better equipped to raise my son than I am, right? We have different experiences for sure, and like there's certain things that maybe he's lived that I haven't lived, right? That I don't personally experience. However, having said that, I think a lot of what you talked about is societal conditioning. It is not just about our parents. It's also our coaches, our friends' families, our aunts, our uncles, our grandparents, all the
Mhm.
conditioning that we get in our lives shapes who we are. Right. And so, yes, of
Yes,
course, our parents play such an important role, but a lack of a father does not mean a bad man. Right. But if a man turns out to be a not great dad, even if his mom did everything she possibly could, put every great male role model in his life, maybe he hit his 20s, consumed content that wasn't great, made some friends that weren't great, and kind of really flipped the switch. Right. Like that's not his mother's fault, and it might not even be his dad's fault for not being present, right? Like that could have happened in
that
a
is
different
true.
environment, right? So I just think I don't think it is like if there's an absent dad, a child won't be successful, or if there's an absent mom, a child won't be successful, or whatever it might be. I do think it's like so layered, and it can be a good outcome or bad outcome regardless. It's really about how we approach parenting, right? Like I just think it's much more complex than that.
So you have sons,
A son,
but
I do.
oh, you have a son, three daughters.
Three daughters. Hmm.
And is your son the oldest or no?
He's the oldest.
Oh, he is?
Yeah.
That's good. He has a lot of sisters to look out for when they get older. So
Yeah.
I think a mother, and I don't, are you familiar with Erica Komisar? I had her on my
No.
podcast recently. Anyway, um, she, well, I believe that a mother is the most important figure in a child's life from birth to six. And even beyond, we still need our mothers for empathy, for love, for nurturing. But especially when it comes to boys, once they hit an age of between like 7 and 10, a mother, it's just a reality that a mother cannot show a man how to be a man.
I think it means, what do you think a man is? Right? Like, I think
Exactly.
that
So, what is a man? So, if we look at these boys who are raised only by single mothers, and maybe they don't even have a father figure of an uncle, or maybe they have the one grandfather who they see once a month. How much of an impact is that one grandfather who they see once a month going to have on them? Like the math just doesn't add up. That time that would compound with a father who's actually present, not just one who's in the household, but the father who's actually present and is working with their son, who's involved in their son, like you're saying, knows about his friends, knows about the sports that he's in, knows about his habits, versus single mother. Maybe there's some other father figures out there, but look at the trajectory of where that kid goes. Now, he could be the exception and he could really make a decision to change his own outcome, just like the other kid who's raised by dual parents and then decides to be a shithead at 20. Those are the exceptions, but the general rule does not apply to boys who are raised by single mothers.
I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree on this for
Okay.
sure. But I think, one, I don't agree with you on the age thing. I think men are just as impactful from the second that baby comes home. I don't think men play a bigger role after a certain age with kids. I think men and women are incredibly impactful at all ages of their kids' lives. And I think I highly encourage dads, like, do an overnight feeding with your baby, change their diapers, know how to soothe them, rock them to sleep, like, be a participant in their lives. It matters. And you can provide care and you can have those bonds with your child from the time that they come home from the hospital. And so I think there is this narrative where men say, like, I'm not important until they're six. And I just don't think that's true. Like, I think men are incredibly important. And I think that's something people miss from my content. I think men are incredibly important to their kids' lives. And I think they play a huge role. I think they've been told that they're only important in certain ways. And I think that's wrong. I think when it comes to men who are raised by single mothers and the statistics that are out there, and you saying that it's the exception, I think it also ignores the fact that typically women who are single mothers live in poverty, again, because of what we
Mm-hmm.
talked about at the beginning of this episode. They don't have the same financial opportunities. They might not be getting child support, right? There's so much that goes into it. It's not about her parenting. It's often about circumstances, socioeconomic standing, right? It's not about the mom's capability of raising a good son. It's about how our society supports women, which they don't. Right? We don't compensate women in the same way we compensate men. And so, what is often ignored too, and the other side of that conversation is, dads who are single dads oftentimes remarry very quickly. So they're considered a single father in the scope of the context of that child, right? They are a single parent to that child, but typically they've remarried, they have another partner. Financially, they continue to do very well. And women, one of the number one indicators of financial trouble in the future is the fact that they have kids. Simply the fact that they have children will put them
Mm-hmm.
in financial trouble in the future. So I think it's looking at it through a very narrow lens. And I encourage men to view themselves as more well-rounded people who are capable of providing impact for their children at all ages and in all different ways, and that women can also teach men how to be good men, because at the end of the day, right, a lot of your content is meant to help men be better for their partners, better for their families, and if women are saying that that's not happening, right, if women are saying all of these men who have been raised under patriarchy or whatever it is and be taught to be this kind of man, but we're divorcing them at an alarming rate. Is that really what it looks like to be a man? Is that right? Have men been raising men right? if all these women are opting out of it, right? And I say this as a woman who's married, right?
Hmm.
And I've been with my husband for a very long time, and he comes from a two-parent household, and all the things that you want to have, and we still struggled with some of these conversations, and I just think it's really important that we look at it more holistically than that. That it's not just about a single mom is incapable of raising a boy. It's about what are the circumstances that single mother is raising that boy within. Where do they live? What are their financial standing? What opportunities does he have or not have because of that, right? We even think about sports, right? And when you're a lower income family, you often can't afford to put your kids in travel sports, which some people would say like that's really beneficial for kids and boys, and not everybody has access to that. So I think it's just a little bit of a larger conversation from my perspective.
No, I think it is larger because I don't mean just single moms, but even the moms who are in the household. There's a husband there, but he is not present. Um, but yeah, I think we could go on a long time about
Yeah,
that.
sure. Yeah.
I also want
Yeah.
to respect your time though.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, and Paige, I appreciate it, and we'll have to do this again. This
Yeah.
was good. I think we definitely our views were a lot aligned, closer than maybe we had initially thought. Which is why I wanted to do this because it's hard to get context in just 30-second videos.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we all come with very different perspectives, right? And we agree on a lot of things and maybe disagree on some. And I think it's important to kind of have these conversations. If the ultimate goal is to, have happy, thriving, healthy homes, relationships, yeah, I think we have to continue to talk about it.
Yes, yes, I do. We do, and we will.